The Celestial War Academy hung in the dark like a silver crown, floating in orbit around a neutron star that painted everything in blue-white light. Ships from 47 different worlds docked at its ports every day. Inside the massive station, young warriors from across the galaxy learned how to fight together instead of against each other. Hana walked through the metal corridors with tired steps. She was 28 years old, human, and currently the most exhausted instructor on the entire station. Her short black hair stuck up in messy spikes because she had been running her hands through it for the past 3 days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her uniform hung loose on her thin frame. She had not slept in 72 hours. The reason was simple. In 2 days, her students would compete in the biggest wargame simulation the Academy had ever created. Every instructor wanted their cadets to win. Hana wanted her cadets to survive. There was a difference. She stopped at a window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, the small blue planet where she had grown up, the planet that most aliens still thought was primitive and weak. Hana smiled slightly. Let them think that. Humans had only joined the Galactic Coalition 3 years ago, but they were already changing things. Her datapad beeped. A message from Doyen, one of her cadets. Instructor Hana, are you coming to the grand briefing? Commander Velthar will talk about siege tactics. It starts in 10 minutes, Hana groaned. The grand briefing, 3 hours of Commander Velthar explaining things that everyone already knew. The Velkrin commander was a brilliant strategist, but he loved the sound of his own voice. Still, all instructors were required to attend. Hana typed back a quick reply. I will be there. She made her way to the grand lecture hall. The massive room could hold 1,000 people. Today it held about 300. Cadets sat in the front rows, organized by their training units. Instructors sat in the back. Hana slipped into a seat in the very last row, hoping to be invisible. Commander Velthar stood at the front. He was Velkrin, which meant he looked like a huge lizard that walked on 2 legs. His scales were deep green, and his yellow eyes could spot a mistake from across a battlefield. He was old, traditional, and did not like changes. Welcome, Velthar began, his voice booming through speakers. Today we discuss the fundamental principles of siege warfare. These tactics have been proven over thousands of years across hundreds of worlds. Hana settled into her chair. She told herself to stay awake. She told herself this was important. She told herself many things, but her body had other ideas. In the front rows, Doyen sat with perfect posture. He was Velkrin like the commander, but young and still learning. 3 months ago, he had thought humans were weak. Then Hana had challenged him to a survival exercise. She had outlasted him by 2 full days, teaching him that strength was not just about muscles and scales. Strength was about adapting. Next to him sat Nari, a Threxian. Her species looked like giant insects with 4 arms and wings that folded against their backs. Other instructors thought Threxians were too gentle to be warriors. Hana had taught Nari that being gentle did not mean being weak. It meant choosing your battles carefully. Commander Velthar continued talking. The first principle of siege warfare is patience. You must surround the enemy and wait. Resources will run low. Morale will break. Victory comes to those who can endure. In the back row, Hana's head began to nod. She jerked awake, blinking hard. Stay awake. Stay awake. But Velthar's voice droned on like background music. The lights in the hall were dim. The chair was comfortable. Her eyes grew heavy. The second principle, Velthar said, is overwhelming force. When you finally attack, you must hit hard enough that resistance crumbles immediately. Hana's head dipped forward. This time she did not jerk awake. Her chin touched her chest. Her breathing slowed and deepened. She was asleep. Doyen noticed first. He glanced back during a pause in the lecture, just checking on his instructor like he always did. What he saw made his heart skip. Instructor Hana was slumped in her seat, clearly unconscious. The dark circles under her eyes looked like bruises in the dim light. He remembered how she had stayed late every night this week, how she had helped him practice tactical formations until 3 in the morning, how she never seemed to eat or rest, always focused on preparing them for the war game. His instructor had worked herself to collapse. Doyen tapped his datapad twice, sending a silent message to Nari. Look at Instructor Hana, back row, asleep. Nari turned her insect head slightly, her compound eyes taking in everything at once. She saw their instructor sleeping and felt a surge of protective anger. Hana had defended her when other instructors wanted to dismiss her from the program. Hana had spent countless hours teaching her strategy and patience. Now Hana needed protection. Nari sent messages to the other cadets in their unit. Instructor Hana is asleep in the back. She has been awake for 3 days preparing us. We protect her now. The messages spread through the front rows like silent fire. Data pads lit up briefly and went dark again. 200 cadets now knew that their human instructor was sleeping in the back of the lecture hall. 200 young warriors who had been taught by humans that protecting your team was more important than following rules. Commander Velthar continued his lecture, unaware. Now we examine the siege of Karnak Prime, a textbook example of proper siege tactics. The attacking force surrounded the planet for 6 months before. His voice rose suddenly, analyzing a tactical error in the historical battle. The defenders made a critical mistake here. They attempted a breakout without proper support, resulting in catastrophic losses. The loud voice echoed through the hall. In the back row, Hana stirred slightly, her head moving. Doyen did not think. He simply acted. His clawed hand slammed down on his desk with a crack that rang through the entire hall. Every head turned toward him. Sir. Doyen's voice was sharp and challenging. With respect, that analysis completely ignores the Proxima offensive. Commander Velthar stopped mid-sentence, his yellow eyes fixed on Doyen like targeting lasers. Cadet Doyen, you dare interrupt this briefing? I dare to point out tactical inconsistencies, sir, Doyen said, keeping his voice loud and firm. Behind him, he could hear Hana's breathing steady again as she settled back into sleep. Good. The Proxima offensive proved that breakout attempts can succeed when Velthar's scales rippled with irritation. He opened his mouth to respond, but Nari spoke first, her crystalline voice cutting through the air. Commander, I must also raise concerns about this analysis. The tactical data presented has multiple inconsistencies. Should we discuss them now, or shall I prepare a detailed report? More hands went up across the front rows. Cadets from a dozen different species, all suddenly filled with urgent questions and challenges. All of them speaking just loud enough to cover any sound from the back of the room. A Gorvaxian cadet, huge and covered in brown fur like a bear, raised one massive paw. Sir, the supply calculations for the siege seem incorrect. The defending force could not have lasted 6 months on those resources. A Quilarian cadet, small and quick like a bird, added her voice. The weather patterns on Karnak Prime would have affected the siege timeline significantly, Commander. Captain Rin, Velthar's second-in-command, was a Sylvari. Her species looked like living plants, graceful and observant. She noticed the pattern immediately. Every time Velthar tried to speak loudly, a cadet interrupted. Every time he raised his voice, another question came. She looked toward the back of the hall and saw the sleeping human instructor. Captain Rin leaned close to Commander Velthar and whispered, her voice like leaves rustling. Commander, they are protecting her. What? Velthar turned to her, confused. The human instructor. In the back row. She is asleep. The cadets are keeping you from waking her. Velthar's eyes narrowed. He scanned the back row and finally spotted Hana, slumped and sleeping peacefully while chaos erupted around her. His first feeling was pure anger. This was disrespectful. This was against regulations. He started to storm down the aisle toward her. He would wake this human and remind her that sleep during official briefings was unacceptable. His boots made loud clanging sounds on the metal floor. Every single cadet in the room stood up. 200 young warriors from 47 different worlds rose to their feet in absolute silence. They did not block his path. They did not speak. They simply stood watching him with calm determination. Velthar stopped walking. Doyen spoke quietly, but his voice carried in the silent hall. Sir, Instructor Hana has been awake for 73 hours. She has been preparing us for the war game. She has not eaten properly. She has not rested. She stayed late every night to ensure we would succeed in your simulation. Nari added, her voice equally quiet. She taught us that protecting your unit is the first principle of warfare, Commander. She taught us that a good leader takes care of their team. The Gorvaxian cadet rumbled softly. She calls us her cubs, sir. We protect our pack. That is what she taught us. Commander Velthar stood frozen in the aisle. He looked at these cadets, these young warriors from across the galaxy. They were not being rebellious. They were not being disrespectful. They were doing exactly what they had been taught. Commander Velthar stood at the front of the Grand Lecture Hall and spoke in a whisper. It felt strange. In all his years of military service, he had never given a tactical briefing at less than full volume. Commanders were supposed to project authority. They were supposed to fill rooms with their voices. But here he was, whispering about siege warfare while 200 cadets leaned forward to hear him. And in the back row, one exhausted human instructor slept peacefully, completely unaware of the chaos she had created. The third principle of siege tactics, Velthar said quietly, is supply line management. An army without supplies is already defeated, no matter how strong. He started to emphasize a point, his voice beginning to rise naturally. Immediately, 3 cadets raised their hands with questions. Doyen cleared his throat loudly. Nari's wings rustled with a sharp buzzing sound. A Quilarian cadet dropped her datapad with a clatter. All of it happened at the exact same moment. All of it was perfectly timed to cover any noise that might reach the back row. Velthar lowered his voice again. Captain Rin, standing beside him, covered her mouth to hide a smile. The other members of the command staff looked confused and uncomfortable. This was not how military briefings were supposed to work, but it was working. The cadets were paying attention with an intensity Velthar had never seen before. They had to focus completely just to hear his whispered words. They leaned forward, their eyes locked on him. Some of them were taking notes faster than ever before. When conducting siege operations, Velthar continued softly, you must consider the psychological impact on both your forces and the enemy. A siege is as much about breaking spirits as breaking walls. In his seat, Doyen felt something shift inside him. This whole situation was insane. They were conducting a major tactical briefing in whispers because his instructor needed sleep. And yet it felt right. It felt more right than anything he had learned in his entire time at the academy. He remembered his first week with instructor Hana. She had been assigned to teach human tactical adaptation, a new course that most cadets thought was pointless. Humans were primitive, everyone said. They had only been in space for a few centuries. What could they possibly teach warriors from civilizations that were thousands of years old? Doyen had been one of the loudest critics. He had made jokes about human weakness. He had questioned why the academy even allowed humans to teach. Then Hana had challenged him to a survival exercise on an ice moon. The memory was still clear in his mind. Day 1 had been easy. Doyen was Velkrin, bred for combat. His scales protected him from the cold. His strength let him hunt the large predators that lived in the ice caves. By the end of Day 1, he had shelter, food, and fire. He felt confident. Day 2, a storm hit. The temperature dropped so low that even his scales could not protect him completely. His fire went out. The predators fled deeper into the caves. Doyen spent the day cold, hungry, and starting to worry. Day 3, he was ready to signal for extraction. He had proved his point, he thought. Then he found Hana's camp. She had built a shelter using ice blocks which held heat better than the rock cave he had chosen. She had traps set for small prey instead of trying to hunt large predators. She had created a chemical heating device from her emergency supplies, and she had extra food. Hungry? She had asked, offering him some of her rations. Doyen had been too proud to accept at first. But Hana had just smiled and left the food beside him. Strength is not refusing help, she had said. Strength is knowing when to accept it. She had stayed on that ice moon for 5 full days. Doyen had given up and called for extraction on Day 4. When he finally returned to the academy, ashamed and humbled, Hana had been waiting for him. She did not mock him. She did not gloat. She just offered to teach him what she knew. That had been 3 months ago. In those 3 months, Doyen had learned more about real combat than in his entire previous year at the academy. Hana taught differently. She did not care about tradition or proper form. She cared about what worked. Next to him, Nari was also remembering. Her memories were more recent but just as powerful. She had been failing her combat simulations badly. Every instructor said the same thing. Threxians were not aggressive enough. They were too gentle. They thought too much and acted too slowly. Commander Velthar himself had recommended that Nari be removed from the program. She will get her unit killed, he had said in her evaluation. She hesitates. She seeks peaceful solutions. These are not the qualities of a warrior. Hana had been the only instructor who disagreed. She had asked for 2 weeks to work with Nari privately. The academy board had agreed, expecting nothing to change. 2 weeks was not enough time to fix fundamental problems, but Hana did not try to fix anything. Instead, she taught Nari to see her gentleness as an advantage. You do not need to be the strongest, Hana had said. You need to be the smartest. Let others rush in. Let others waste their energy on direct attacks. You watch. You learn. You wait for the perfect moment. She had taught Nari about patience as a weapon, about how thinking could defeat raw power, about how the quietest warrior could often be the most dangerous. At the end of 2 weeks, Nari had run the combat simulation again. This time she scored in the top 10% of her entire class. She had not become more aggressive. She had simply learned to use her natural instincts as tactical advantages instead of weaknesses. Every cadet in the room had similar stories. The Gorvaxian named Taiho had been too emotional, his instructor said. He let his feelings control his actions. Hana taught him that emotions were data, useful information about situations. Learn to read them, she said, and you can predict what others will do. A Quilarian cadet named Mireille had been too small and weak for standard combat training. Hana taught her that size did not matter if you were fast enough and smart enough. She showed Mireille how to use her small size to get into places larger warriors could not reach, how to strike from unexpected angles, how to be invisible until the moment of attack. Hana had taken everyone that the academy said was not good enough and showed them how to be excellent. She did not change them. She taught them to use what they already were. At the front of the hall, Commander Velthar was still whispering his way through the briefing. But he was beginning to notice something interesting. The cadets were not just listening better. They were understanding better. When he paused to let them think about a concept, he could see them processing it deeply. Without his loud voice to dominate the room, the cadets had to engage their minds fully. They could not just sit and absorb information passively. They had to lean in. They had to focus. They had to want to understand. Captain Rin leaned close to him and whispered, "Sir, we should consider making this standard practice. They are learning more this way." Velthar glanced at her in surprise, then looked back at the cadets. She was right. This was better, quieter, stranger, completely against protocol, but better. The door at the back of the hall opened silently. Admiral Crost entered. He was Dralaxian, which meant his body was made of living crystal that reflected light in rainbow patterns. He was also the commander of the entire Celestial War Academy. His presence made everyone nervous. Crost stood in the doorway, taking in the bizarre scene before him. A whispered tactical briefing. Cadets leaning forward with intense focus. Command staff distributing written notes instead of speaking. And there, in the back row, one human instructor sleeping peacefully through it all. Several other instructors crowded behind the Admiral, curious about the rumors they had heard. A Velcrin instructor named Quan whispered to her colleague, "Is that Instructor Hana? Is she actually sleeping during the grand briefing?" Another instructor, a Threxian named Juno, murmured back, "Look at the cadets. They are protecting her." All of them. Admiral Crost said nothing. He simply watched. He was old and wise, and he had seen many strange things in his long military career. But he had never seen anything quite like this. 200 warriors from different worlds, different cultures, different species, all united in protecting one sleeping human. The briefing continued in whispers. Velthar moved on to discussing supply chain logistics. The cadets took notes silently. Every few minutes, someone would make a small noise to cover any sound that might travel to the back row. A cough here, a dropped stylus there, the rustling of wings or the scrape of claws on the floor. It was the most coordinated operation Admiral Crost had ever witnessed. And it was all being done instinctively, without orders or planning. These cadets had been taught unit cohesion by their human instructor. Now they were demonstrating it perfectly. Around the 2-hour mark of the briefing, Hana stirred. Her head shifted slightly to the left. Her hand moved, reaching up to brush at her face. Every eye in the room turned toward her. 200 cadets held their breath. Even Velthar paused mid-sentence, waiting. Hana mumbled something in her sleep. "Flank from the asteroid field. Use gravity." Then she settled back down, her breathing evening out again. She was still deeply asleep. Doyen smiled slightly. Even in her dreams, Instructor Hana was working out tactical problems. He glanced at Nari, who looked back at him with her compound eyes. They did not need to speak. They both knew what they were thinking. Hana stood in her quarters, staring at the mirror. She looked like herself again. 18 hours of sleep had erased the worst of the exhaustion. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. Her hands no longer shook. She felt human again instead of like a walking ghost, But she also felt embarrassed. She had fallen asleep during an official briefing. In front of the entire command staff. In front of 200 cadets. Any normal instructor would have been disciplined, maybe even dismissed. Instead, her students had protected her. Her datapad beeped. A message from Admiral Crost. Instructor Hana, please report to my office at your earliest convenience. The words were polite, but she knew what they meant. She was about to face the consequences of yesterday. She put on her uniform carefully, making sure everything was perfect. Then she made her way through the academy corridors toward the Admiral's office. Other instructors stared at her as she passed. Some looked disapproving. Others looked curious. One human instructor, a man named Junho, gave her a small nod of respect. The Admiral's door slid open before she could knock. Come in, Instructor Hana, Admiral Crost's voice called from inside. She entered and stood at attention. The Admiral sat behind his desk, his crystalline body reflecting the light from the windows. Commander Velthar stood to one side. Hana braced herself for the reprimand. Instead, Admiral Crost gestured to a chair. Sit down, please. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. She sat, keeping her back straight. Admiral, I apologize for my unprofessional behavior. There is no excuse for falling asleep during an official briefing. I understand if you need to take disciplinary action. Cross tilted his head, light dancing across his crystal features. Instructor, when was the last time you took a full rest period before yesterday? Hana hesitated. I'm not sure, sir. Several days at least. Your sleep logs show you have been getting an average of 2 hours per night for the past 2 weeks. Velthar said quietly. You have been working 16 to 18-hour days preparing your cadets for the war game. My cadets needed the preparation, sir, Hana said. The war game is the most important test of the year. Admiral Crost leaned forward. And what use would you be to them if you collapsed completely? What would they learn if their instructor destroyed herself through overwork? The words hit Hana hard. She had not thought about it that way. She opened her mouth to respond, but Crost continued speaking. What happened yesterday was remarkable, Instructor. 200 cadets from 47 different worlds acted as one unit to protect you. They coordinated without orders. They adapted without planning. They demonstrated the kind of unit cohesion that we spend years trying to teach, and they learned it from you. Velthar nodded. I have been teaching at this academy for 20 years. I have never seen anything like what your cadets did. They understand something fundamental about warfare that many never grasp. They understand that protecting your unit is not secondary to the mission. It is the mission. Hana felt tears threatening again. She fought them back. Thank you, sir. Both of you. I did not expect this. The war game begins in 4 hours, Crost said. Your cadets are ready. You made sure of that. Now you need to let them prove it. And, Instructor? After the war game, you will take 3 days of mandatory rest. That is an order. Yes, sir, Hana said, standing. She saluted and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Admiral? Commander? Thank you for conducting the briefing in whispers. My cadets told me what you did. Velthar's expression softened slightly. Your cadets taught me something yesterday, Instructor. They reminded me what it means to lead with compassion. That is a lesson I had forgotten. 4 hours later, the war game simulation began. The training arena was massive, a virtual space that could simulate entire solar systems. 10 teams of cadets would compete, each trying to complete objectives while fighting against the others. It was brutal, complex, and designed to push warriors to their limits. Hana's Cubs, officially designated as Training Unit 7, had been given the worst starting position. They began in an asteroid field with limited resources and enemies on all sides. It was a position designed to test defensive tactics and resource management. Most units in this position focused on survival, hoping to outlast some of the other teams. Hana watched from the observation deck alongside the other instructors and the command staff. Admiral Crost and Commander Velthar stood nearby, monitoring all 10 teams on multiple displays. The simulation started. Immediately, most teams began aggressive maneuvers, trying to gain advantages and eliminate weaker opponents. Training Unit 3, led by a brilliant Velkran strategist, pushed forward with overwhelming force. Training Unit 1, composed entirely of elite warriors, moved to secure the high-value objectives. Training Unit 7 did something different. They retreated deeper into the asteroid field. What are they doing? another instructor asked, frowning. They are giving up territory without a fight. Hana said nothing, but she smiled slightly. She knew what her cubs were doing. They were using one of the first lessons she had taught them. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is retreat. Doyen commanded the unit from their main ship. Around him, his teammates coordinated smoothly. Nari handled communications and intelligence. Teho, the Gorvaxian, managed weapons and defense. Mirai, the small Kilarian, was in charge of navigation through the dangerous asteroid field. Training Unit 5 is pursuing us, Nari reported, her multiple eyes tracking the display. They think we are running scared. Good, Doyen said calmly. Let them think that. Mirai, take us deeper. I want heavy asteroid cover. They are following, Teho rumbled. Should I prepare weapons? Not yet, Doyen said. Remember what Instructor Hana taught us. Let them waste their energy. We save ours for the perfect moment. Training Unit 5 chased them deeper into the asteroid field. The pursuing team was confident, sure of their superior position. They had more ships and better weapons. Unit 7 was trapped and outnumbered. This would be an easy elimination. Then Mirai led them into a dense cluster of asteroids. The space became narrow and chaotic. Large rocks tumbled through the area, creating a navigation nightmare. Unit 5 slowed down, trying to avoid collisions. Now, Doyen said quietly, Unit 7 split into 3 groups. They had practiced this maneuver 100 times. Mirai's group used the asteroids as cover, appearing and disappearing. Teho's group circled around behind the enemy. Nari's group created false sensor readings that made Unit 5 think there were ships where there were only empty space. Unit 5 found themselves surrounded in the middle of the asteroid field. They tried to fight back, but they were confused and disoriented. Within minutes, they were eliminated from the simulation. On the observation deck, the other instructors stared at the displays in shock. How did they do that? One of them asked. Unit 5 had superior numbers and firepower. They turned their weakness into strength, Hana said softly. They used the environment. They coordinated perfectly. They waited for the right moment. These are not complicated tactics. They are just tactics that require patience and trust. Commander Velthar nodded slowly. They are using human tactics, adaptation, deception, turning retreat into ambush. These are not strategies we teach in standard courses. Maybe we should start, Admiral Crost said thoughtfully. The war game continued. Training Unit 7 faced challenge after challenge. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. According to every traditional metric, they should have been eliminated early, but they kept surviving. More than surviving, they kept winning. They used every trick Hana had taught them. When faced with a superior force, they retreated and set traps. When resources were low, they found creative solutions. When their ships were damaged, they turned the damaged vessels into decoys while their real forces attacked from unexpected angles. And most importantly, they protected each other. When one ship was hit, others moved to cover it. When one team member was overwhelmed, others adapted to support them. They operated not as individuals, but as a single unified organism. By the halfway point of the simulation, only 4 teams remained. Training Unit 7 was one of them. The other 3 were the Academy's best and most experienced units. No one had expected Unit 7 to make it this far. Then came the moment that would be studied in Academy classes for years to come. Unit 7 found themselves in an impossible situation. They were cornered by 2 other units working together. The enemy forces had 3 times as many ships. Unit 7 had nowhere to retreat. Their resources were almost exhausted. Standard military doctrine was clear. Surrender and preserve your forces. Live to fight another day. It was the logical choice. The smart choice. The choice that would save lives. Doyen looked at his team. Nari met his eyes. Teho cracked his knuckles. Mirai's feathers ruffled with determination. They all knew what they had to do. They had been taught by a human after all. And humans did not believe in impossible situations. Remember the ice moon? Doyen asked his team. Remember what Instructor Hana taught us. Adaptation is survival. Creativity beats strength. And sometimes the only way out is through. What is the plan? Nari asked. Doyen smiled, showing all his teeth. We are going to do something insane. We are going to use Hana's gambit. The war game simulation ended 3 hours later. Training Unit 7 stood victorious. They had started from the worst position with the fewest resources. They had been outnumbered and outgunned at every turn, and they had won. The observation deck erupted into chaos. Instructors argued with each other about what had just happened. Some claimed it was luck. Others said the simulation had been flawed. A few insisted that Unit 7's tactics were too reckless to be considered real victories. Admiral Crost raised one crystalline hand. The room fell silent immediately. Instructors, command staff, please assemble in the Grand Hall in 1 hour. We will conduct the official debriefing there. All cadets who participated in the war game are also required to attend. Hana left the observation deck quickly. She needed to find her cubs before the official debriefing. She needed to know they were okay. The simulation might have been virtual, but the stress and exhaustion were very real. She found them in the cadet recreation area. All 20 members of Training Unit 7 were there, along with several dozen other cadets who had watched the simulation. When Hana entered, the room went quiet. Then every single cadet stood up. Doyen stepped forward. He looked tired but happy. His scales were scratched from the simulated combat and his uniform was wrinkled. He had never looked more proud. "Instructor Hana," he said formally. "Training Unit 7 reporting mission success." Hana's throat tightened with emotion. She looked at each of her cubs in turn. Doyen, who had learned that strength included knowing when to accept help. Nari, who had discovered that gentleness could be a weapon. Taiho, who had found that emotions were data instead of weakness. Mirai, who had proven that small size meant nothing when combined with intelligence. "I am so proud of you," Hana said quietly. "All of you. You took everything I taught you and made it better. You trusted each other. You protected each other. You refused to give up. That is what real warriors do." Nari's crystalline voice chimed softly. "We learned from the best, instructor. You taught us that winning is not about being the strongest. It is about being the smartest, the most adaptable, and the most united." Taiho rumbled his agreement. "And you taught us that protecting our pack is more important than following rules. We protected you during the briefing because that is what you taught us to do. We protected each other during the war game for the same reason." 1 hour later, the Grand Hall was filled to capacity. Every cadet who had participated in the war game sat in the front rows. Instructors filled the middle section. Command staff and senior officers occupied the back. Admiral Crost stood at the front waiting for everyone to settle. When the room was finally quiet, Crost began to speak. His voice carried easily through the hall. "We have just witnessed the most unusual war game in the history of this academy. Training Unit 7 achieved victory despite every disadvantage. They succeeded where traditional tactics would have failed. The question now is why?" He gestured to Commander Velthar. "Commander, you observed the entire simulation. Please share your analysis." Velthar stood and walked to the front. He looked different than he had yesterday during the whispered briefing. Less rigid, less certain, more thoughtful. "I have been teaching military tactics for 20 years, he began. "I have studied warfare from hundreds of worlds across thousands of years. I thought I understood what made warriors effective." He paused, his yellow eyes scanning the room. "Training Unit 7 proved me wrong. They won not because they followed traditional doctrine. They won because they rejected it. They retreated when doctrine said to attack. They used deception when doctrine demanded direct confrontation. They sacrificed resources when doctrine insisted on preservation." Another pause. Velthar looked directly at Hana. "They won because they had been taught by humans. And humans, I am learning, understand something about warfare that we have forgotten. They understand that protection and aggression are not opposites. They are two sides of the same blade. The strongest warriors are those who fight not just to win, but to protect what they care about." Murmurs spread through the hall. Some instructors nodded in agreement. Others looked skeptical. A few looked angry at the suggestion that traditional methods were somehow lacking. Velthar continued. "Yesterday, something remarkable happened in this very hall. I was conducting a standard tactical briefing. My voice was loud, as commanders' voices should be. Then I nearly woke Instructor Hana, who was sleeping after 73 hours of continuous work preparing her cadets. He looked at the cadets in the front rows. 200 of you acted as one to protect her. You coordinated without orders. You adapted without planning. You demonstrated perfect unit cohesion across 47 different species, and you did it instinctively, because she had taught you that protecting your unit is the first principle of warfare." Velthar's voice dropped lower, becoming almost confessional. I had a teacher once, 30 years ago when I was a cadet. She was brilliant and dedicated. She worked herself to exhaustion trying to prepare us for a crucial test. One day she collapsed during training. The hall was completely silent now. Everyone leaned forward to hear him. We did nothing. We stood and watched. Some of my fellow cadets laughed. I remained silent. She was dismissed from the academy in shame. I have regretted my silence for 30 years. I have wondered what would have happened if we had protected her the way you protected Instructor Hana. Velthar looked at Doyen directly. Thank you, Cadet Doyen, for being braver than I was. Thank you for understanding that true strength includes compassion. Doyen stood and bowed his head respectfully. Commander, Instructor Hana taught us something simple. She taught us that a good leader takes care of their team, and a good team takes care of their leader. It is not complicated. It is just about caring for each other. Admiral Cross stepped forward again. This brings us to the question of what happens next. Training Unit 7 has demonstrated tactics and cohesion that exceed our current standards. Instructor Hana has proven teaching methods that produce exceptional results. The question is, do we dismiss these as anomalies or do we learn from them? He looked around the room, his crystalline eyes reflecting the light. I believe we must learn. Therefore, I am announcing several changes to Academy protocol, effective immediately. The room erupted in whispers. Cross waited for quiet before continuing. First, instructor welfare is now a command priority. No instructor will be permitted to work more than 12 hours per day without explicit permission. Exhausted teachers serve no one, as yesterday clearly demonstrated. Some instructors looked relieved. Others looked concerned about how this would affect their work. Hana felt tears threatening again. The academy was actually changing because of her cub's actions. Second, Cross continued, cross-species unit cohesion will be emphasized in all training programs. We have spent too long training cadets within their species groups. Human instructor Hana has proven that mixed species units can achieve exceptional results when properly trained. More murmurs. This was a significant change. For decades, the academy had grouped cadets by species, believing that similar physiology and culture made for better teams. Hana had proven that diversity, when properly managed, was actually stronger. Third, tactical flexibility is hereby elevated to equal status with traditional doctrine. We will begin incorporating human adaptive strategies into our standard curriculum. We will teach that there is more than one right way to approach a problem. This caused more controversy. Several older instructors looked outraged. Traditional doctrine had guided the Galactic Coalition military for centuries. Now a human who had been teaching for less than a year was changing everything. An elderly Velkrin instructor stood up. His name was Hyun, and he had been teaching longer than most of the cadets had been alive. Admiral, with respect, these changes are too radical. We have centuries of proven tactics. We cannot simply discard them because one unit had one successful simulation. Cross nodded. I understand your concern, Instructor Hyun. We are not discarding traditional tactics. We are supplementing them. Human strategies do not replace our doctrine. They expand it. They give our warriors more tools to use. Hyun remained standing. And what of the risks? Training Unit 7 succeeded, yes, but their tactics were reckless. They could have failed catastrophically. They sacrificed half their fleet on a desperate gamble. Is that really what we want to teach? Hana stood up from her seat. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to speak clearly. Instructor Hyun is correct that my cubs took risks, but they took calculated risks. They understood their situation. They knew their options. They chose the path that gave them the best chance of success, even though it was dangerous. She looked at her cubs sitting in the front rows. I taught them that sometimes the safest option is actually the most dangerous. Sometimes playing it safe means slow defeat. Sometimes the only way to survive is to risk everything on a bold move. That is not recklessness. That is wisdom. Captain Rin, Velthar's second-in-command, stood as well. Her plant-like features were thoughtful. I have observed Instructor Hana's teaching. 6 months passed like a dream. The changes Admiral Cross had announced spread through the academy slowly but steadily. Instructors began teaching in whispers sometimes, forcing cadets to focus harder. Mixed species units became the standard instead of the exception. Human adaptive tactics appeared in tactical courses alongside traditional doctrine. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Some of the older instructors complained that standards were dropping. A few threatened to resign. But most adapted, especially when they saw the results. Cadets were performing better. Team cohesion was stronger. Problem solving was more creative. Hana spent those months training other instructors in her methods. It was harder than teaching cadets. Adult warriors who had spent decades teaching one way did not want to change. But slowly some of them began to understand. They began to see that protecting cadets was not coddling them. That allowing creative solutions was not abandoning discipline. Now graduation day had arrived. The Grand Hall was decorated with banners from 47 different worlds. Families had traveled across the galaxy to watch their children receive their commissions. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Hana stood backstage adjusting her formal uniform. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who had changed over the past year. She looked older, more confident. The academy had challenged her in ways she had never expected. But it had also given her something precious. It had given her cubs a knock on the door. Doyen entered wearing his new officer's uniform. He looked impressive, every inch the warrior he had become. But his eyes were soft as he looked at his instructor. "They are ready for you, Instructor Hana. You are giving the speech before the commissions are awarded." Hana smiled at him. "How are you feeling, Doyen? Ready to leave the academy?" "Excited, nervous, grateful." He paused. "I have been assigned to the Frontier Defense Fleet. I will be a tactical officer on a heavy cruiser. 6 other members of our unit are coming with me." "That is excellent news," Hana said. "You will take care of each other out there." "We will," Doyen agreed. "You taught us how. Instructor, I wanted to thank you. When I first arrived at this academy, I thought humans had nothing to teach me. I was arrogant and foolish. You showed me that strength comes in forms I had never considered." Hana felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You taught me things too, Doyen. You taught me that courage means being willing to change your mind. That real warriors admit when they are wrong. That pride is nothing compared to growth." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Doyen straightened. "It is time. Your cubs are waiting." Hana walked onto the stage. The Grand Hall was packed. Thousands of cadets sat in perfect rows. Their families filled the upper galleries. The command staff occupied the front section. And there, in the place of honor, sat Training Unit 7, her cubs. Looking at her with pride and affection, Admiral Crost stood at the podium. His crystalline form reflected the lights beautifully. Instructors, cadets, honored guests, welcome to the graduation ceremony for Class 7 of the Celestial War Academy. This class has been exceptional in many ways. They have set new standards. They have challenged old assumptions. They have proven that the future of the Galactic Coalition military is bright. He gestured to Hana. "Before we begin the commission ceremony, we have a special speaker. Instructor Hana has been teaching at this academy for 1 year. In that short time, she has changed how we think about warfare, leadership, and strength. She has taught us that humans, despite being one of the youngest species in the coalition, have wisdom that centuries-old civilizations can learn from. Please welcome Instructor Hana." The hall erupted in applause. Hana walked to the podium, her heart racing. She had fought in battles. She had survived impossible situations. But speaking in front of thousands of people terrified her. She looked down at her notes, then looked up at her cubs. They were smiling at her, encouraging her. She put the notes aside. She would speak from her heart instead. "When I arrived at this academy 1 year ago," Hana began, her voice carrying through the hall, "I was not sure I belonged here. I was human. Most of you had never heard of Earth. Those who had thought of it as a primitive backwater world. I was young. I was inexperienced. I had no reputation, no credentials that mattered on a galactic scale." She paused, looking around the room. "But I had something else. I had human stubbornness. I had the determination that comes from being underestimated your entire life. And I had lessons that Earth had taught me. Lessons about survival. About adaptation. About turning weaknesses into weapons. I was assigned to teach human tactical adaptation. Most cadets thought it would be an easy class. What could humans possibly teach warriors from civilizations thousands of years old? But my cubs, my wonderful cubs, were willing to learn. They listened. They questioned. They challenged me. And together, we discovered something important. Hana looked directly at Training Unit 7. We discovered that strength is not one thing. It is many things. Strength is knowing when to fight and when to retreat. Strength is protecting those who need protection. Strength is admitting when you are wrong. Strength is getting back up after you fall down. Strength is working together instead of competing. Strength is being gentle when everyone expects you to be hard. She smiled at the memory of the whispered briefing. 6 months ago, I made a mistake. I worked myself to exhaustion. I fell asleep during an official briefing. It was unprofessional. It was embarrassing. It should have ended my career. Instead, my cubs protected me. 200 warriors from 47 worlds acted as one to keep me safe while I rested. They coordinated without orders. They adapted without planning. They demonstrated perfect unity across every difference that might have divided them. And they did it because I had taught them that protecting your unit is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. The cadets in the audience were completely silent, hanging on every word. Hana continued. That day, Commander Velthar made a choice. He could have woken me. He could have disciplined my cubs for their interference. Instead, he conducted the rest of his briefing in whispers. He adapted. He showed compassion. He demonstrated that true leadership means knowing when to change the rules. Later that day, my cubs competed in the war game simulation. They started from the worst position with the fewest resources. They were outnumbered and outgunned at every turn. Traditional tactics said they should lose quickly. Instead, they won. They won because they used everything I had taught them. They adapted. They protected each other. They refused to give up. They proved that sometimes the only way out is through. Hana's voice grew stronger. Today you are graduating. You are receiving your commissions. You are leaving this academy to serve the Galactic Coalition across hundreds of worlds. Some of you will command ships. Some will lead ground forces. Some will teach the next generation of warriors. Whatever you do, wherever you go, I want you to remember 3 things. First, protect your people. Your mission is important, but your team is more important. Warriors who sacrifice their units for victory do not deserve to lead. Take care of those who serve with you. They will take care of you in return. Second, adapt constantly. The enemy will not cooperate with your plans. Situations will change. What worked yesterday might fail tomorrow. Be flexible. Be creative. Be willing to try things that have never been done before. Remember that the impossible is just something that has not been accomplished yet. Third, know when to whisper. Not every problem requires maximum force. Not every challenge needs aggression. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be gentle. Sometimes the strongest move is compassion. Sometimes victory comes not from roaring louder than your enemy, but from knowing when to speak softly. Hana looked around the hall one last time. You are the finest warriors the galaxy has ever produced. Not because you are the strongest or the fastest or the most aggressive, but because you understand that true strength includes compassion, that real courage includes gentleness, that the best warriors are those who fight not just to win, but to protect what they love. She stepped back from the podium. Go out there and show the galaxy what you have learned. Show them that the future is not about being harder or crueler or more violent. The future is about being smarter, more adaptable, and more united. Thank you, my cubs. All of you. It has been my honor to teach you. The hall exploded in applause. The cadets stood as one, cheering and stomping their feet. The sound was deafening. Hana stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face now, not bothering to hide them anymore. These were her cubs, all of them, and they were ready to change the galaxy. The commission ceremony took 2 hours. Each graduating cadet walked across the stage to receive their official commission from Admiral Crost. Each one saluted, received their assignment, and moved to join their new units. When Training Unit 7 crossed the stage, the applause was especially loud. Doyen received his commission as a tactical officer. Nari became an intelligence specialist. Teho was assigned to defensive operations. Mireille became a navigation officer. One by one, Hana's original cubs received their assignments and their new ranks.